Don't bother checking her chart anymore, doctor. My daughter-in-law has completely lost touch with reality, and we are prepared to sign the involuntary commitment papers today. That was my mother-in-law Constance's voice, smooth as imported silk, drifting through the half-open door of my private hospital room. I was lying in a bed at Mercycrest Medical Center, my hands trembling under the heavy thermal blanket, a plastic ID bracelet cutting into my wrist. My husband Garrett's voice came next, lower, heavy with performative sorrow. It's true, Dr. Patel. She's been hallucinating about an inheritance for weeks. We just want her safe. My fingers curled tightly around the edge of the stiff white sheet. I kept my breathing slow, rhythmic, mimicking the shallow pattern of someone heavily sedated. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't make a sound. But under that blanket, my left hand was gripping a worn, blue-plaid handkerchief that smelled faintly of sawdust and white pine, the only piece of my grandfather that they hadn't been able to touch. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you and earns your support. And drop your location and local time in the comments below. I want to know exactly where you are listening from right now. Now, let me take you back 18 months before the hospital room to a quiet morning in Ridgemont, Ohio, and the last time my life ever felt like it belonged to me. My name is Sarah Caldwell, and I am 29 years old. For 3 generations, the Caldwell family name didn't mean much to the bankers downtown, but it meant everything to the people who lived along Cedar Lake. My grandfather, Harold Caldwell, was a man who built things with his own 2 hands. He was an electrician by trade and a carpenter by passion, built like a steel cable wrapped in a flannel shirt. When I was 12 years old, he would pick me up in his old white pickup truck with the metal toolbox bolted to the bed and drive me 40 minutes out to the lake. The family cabin sat back from the water, completely surrounded by white pines so tall they blocked the harsh afternoon sun. The front porch sagged slightly on the left side. The screen door never latched quite right, and the air inside always smelled of wood smoke, old leather-bound books, and a faint, sweet sharpness of pine resin that I could never fully describe. "Grab the other end of this rail, Sarah Bear," Grandpa Harold would say, lifting a heavy piece of rotted cedar. I would take the end, my small hands getting covered in splinters and dirt, and we would spend the entire morning replacing fence posts along the south boundary line. He never rushed me. He showed me how to check for rot by pressing my thumb deep into the grain of the wood. If it gave under pressure, it was done. It had to be replaced from the root. Inside the cabin, my grandmother Vivian would have iced tea and thick turkey sandwiches waiting on the heavy walnut kitchen table, the very table Grandpa had built by hand the year they got married. Grandma Vivian was a quiet woman with silver hair pinned up into a neat bun and sharp, watchful eyes. She spent her afternoons reading on the porch, and whenever I walked out, she would pat the woven vinyl chair right beside her. "This cabin stays in the family, Sarah," Grandpa told me one evening as the sun began to dip below the tree line, wiping sawdust off his calloused palms with a blue-plaid handkerchief. "But remember something, sweetheart. Family isn't always about the blood running through your veins. Family is whoever actually shows up when the floorboards start to rot." I didn't fully understand what he meant back then. I was 12. I thought he was just being poetic after a long day of manual labor. He wasn't. That entire summer, I came out to Cedar Lake every single Saturday. I learned exactly where the water heater leaked, which window frames stuck in the humidity, and how to bleed the old cast-iron radiators before the first freeze. Grandpa showed me the property line markers, old iron stakes he had hammered into the dirt himself. I had no idea then that my grandfather was already talking to a corporate estate lawyer named Margaret Morrison downtown about exactly this place. And about exactly me. Back home in the suburbs of Ridgemont, the air was entirely different. Our house was fine. 3 bedrooms, a small yard that always needed mowing, and a garage my father used for storage. It was fine, but it wasn't warm. My mother had passed away when I was 7, and my father had spent the rest of his life managing a mid-level auto repair shop, constantly stressed about margins and invoices. He valued 2 things above all else: social standing and obedience. When I started my career as a graphic designer, working freelance from a small desk in my spare bedroom, my father viewed it as an unstable hobby. "When are you going to get a real job, Sarah?" he would ask at Sunday dinners, barely looking up from his plate. Then, 2 years ago, I met Garrett Whitfield. Garrett was charming in a way that I had never experienced. He was tall, with dark hair swept back perfectly, and a sharp, defined jawline that looked like it had been sketched in an executive boardroom. He worked in commercial real estate acquisitions for his family's firm, Whitfield Development. The Whitfields were old money in our county. Their name was stamped on a luxury subdivision, a commercial plaza, and a bronze plaque at the country club where they had held a membership for 30 years. The first time Garrett took me to dinner, it was at a French restaurant in Columbus where the cloth napkins were heavier than my winter coat. He opened doors, pulled out chairs, and listened to me talk about my design business with a look of intense, quiet admiration. I fell in love fast. When you spend your life feeling somewhat invisible in your own home, a man who shines a spotlight on you feels like oxygen. But the spotlight came with a shadow, and her name was Constance Whitfield. Constance was 54 years old, built like a steel rod wrapped in cream silk, with pearl earrings the size of dimes and a short, frosted haircut that never had a single strand out of place. She chaired the local foundation's annual gala and sat on 3 separate nonprofit boards. The first time Garrett brought me to their 5-bedroom estate on 2 acres of manicured lawn, Constance stood in the grand foyer, looked me up and down, and gave a small smile. The kind of smile that stops exactly at the teeth and never reaches the eyes. "A freelance graphic designer," she had said, tilting her head as she handed her coat to the housekeeper. "How interesting. Garrett usually dates the Harrison girl, the neurosurgeon's daughter over at St. Luke's, but I suppose every young man needs a hobby." Garrett had squeezed my hand tightly under the mahogany dining table that night and whispered, "Don't worry, babe. She'll warm up once she gets to know you." She never did. Every holiday, every dinner, Constance managed to deliver subtle, passive-aggressive cuts disguised as polite conversation. If I wore a dress from a local department store, she would comment on how brave I was to embrace practical fashion. If I spoke about a successful client project, she would steer the conversation toward the family's latest multi-million-dollar commercial acquisition. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was marrying Garrett, not his mother. I made a calculated decision to lose the small battles to win the war. I let Constance choose the wedding venue, the Whitfield Country Club, instead of the small lakeside church I preferred. I let her choose the catering menu, the floral arrangements, and the ivory linens. I told myself that the party didn't matter. The marriage did. Grandpa Harold passed away during the winter of my 3rd year with Garrett. The funeral was held on a bitter gray Tuesday in December. The wind off the lake was freezing, and the folding chairs sank slowly into the damp, icy lawn of the cemetery. I sat in the front row, clutching Grandpa's blue plaid handkerchief, the scent of pine long gone, replaced by the sterile smell of the funeral home. Garrett stood beside me, his arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders, looking every bit the supportive partner. But at the reception afterward, I noticed Garrett and his mother standing near the dessert station, talking in low, hushed tones. Constance had a manila folder tucked under her arm, and Garrett was nodding slowly, his eyes scanning the room before locking onto me. I catch one sentence from Constance as I walked past to get a glass of water. "We need to get the title sorted out before probate gets complicated." They were talking about Grandpa's cabin, at his funeral. 3 months later, the real nightmare began. Grandma Vivian's health declined rapidly after Grandpa passed, and she joined him by the spring. I was the only family member at her bedside at Swedish Medical Center when she drew her last breath. She held my hand with surprising strength, her knuckles white, and whispered her final words into my ear. "The cabin is yours, Sarah. They're going to try to take it. Don't let them. Your grandfather built a wall they can't see." The day after Grandma Vivian's burial, Garrett sat across from me at our kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee between his hands. He looked tired, his perfect hair slightly disheveled. "Sarah, honey," he began, his voice soft, practiced, using his finest client negotiation tone. "My mother and I were looking at the family property records. With your grandparents gone, the Cedar Lake cabin is just sitting there losing value. The property taxes alone are going to drain our savings. Whitfield Development has a luxury lakefront project launching next month, and we can acquire the cabin lot for $450,000. It's a clean cash deal. I set my mug down. The clink of the ceramic against the quartz countertop was the only sound in the room. "The cabin isn't for sale, Garrett," I said flatly. "Grandpa built that place. Grandma made me promise to keep it in the family." Garrett sighed, a heavy, patronizing sound. "Sarah, your grandparents were elderly and emotional at the end. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. Our business is struggling with cash flow right now because of a delayed project in Columbus. This sale could secure our future, clear our debts, and put a massive down payment on the house we wanted in the suburbs. We have to be practical. We are a family now." "No," I said cleanly. "The answer is no." Garrett's expression shifted. For a fraction of a second, the charming facade dropped, and I saw something cold, calculating, and entirely unfamiliar behind his eyes. He didn't yell. He just stood up, smoothed his button-down shirt, and walked out of the kitchen. The next evening, Constance came over for dinner unannounced. She didn't take off her cream trench coat. She walked straight into our living room, opened her designer leather bag, and pulled out a stack of documents, sliding them across the coffee table toward me. "Sarah, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Garrett told me you're having some anxiety about the property transfer. I brought over a standard quitclaim deed. It transfers the cabin rights to Whitfield Development. We've already allocated $50,000 cash for you personally, as a gift, for your little design business. Most girls your age would jump at that kind of money." I didn't look at the papers. I looked directly at my mother-in-law. "Whose name is currently on the deed at the county recorder's office, Constance?" The artificial smile on her face froze. A tiny muscle near her jaw twitched. "Your grandparents, of course, but they are deceased, Sarah. It passes to the legal heirs. As their only grandchild, you simply need to sign this formality so we can clear the title and close the deal with our investors. We have timelines to meet." "I am not signing anything," I said, standing up, "and I'd like you to leave my house." Constance rose slowly, her pearl earrings catching the light. She looked at Garrett, who was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his hands deep in his pockets, completely silent. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing into two slits of pure ice. "You're being unstable, Sarah. This emotional volatility isn't healthy. Garrett, your wife clearly isn't feeling well. We'll talk about this when she's in a more rational state of mind." After she left, Garrett didn't argue with me. He didn't mention the cabin again for 2 weeks. He became incredibly attentive, making me tea in the evenings, asking about my sleep, and constantly checking on my mental health. "You seem stressed, babe," he would say, stroking my hair as we watched television. "You've been forgetting things lately. Are you sure you're feeling okay? Losing your grandparents back-to-back has clearly taken a massive toll on your psychological stability." I wasn't forgetting things, but Garrett started creating moments to make me feel like I was. I would find my car keys inside the refrigerator. I would find my design laptop unplugged and hidden under a stack of old magazines in the spare room. When I would panic, looking for my tools, Garrett would appear with a look of deep, performative concern. "I found them in the trash bin, Sarah. You put them there yesterday when you were clearing out the kitchen. Don't you remember?" "Honey, I'm really getting worried about your memory." They were gaslighting me. They were systematically building a narrative of mental incompetence, and I was too isolated to see the full scope of the architecture they were constructing around me. 3 days before my 30th birthday, I was working late at my desk when I received an email notification. It was an automated alert from a personal cloud drive that I shared with Garrett for household expenses. A new folder had been uploaded, marked confidential. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were PDF documents from a private medical assessment firm. The headers read, "Psychological Evaluation and Competency Report, Sarah Caldwell Whitfield." My hands went entirely numb as I scrolled through the pages. It was a comprehensive, professional report filled with documented instances of my severe memory loss, emotional delusions regarding non-existent inheritances, and unstable outbursts against family members. It concluded with a formal recommendation for an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold and the appointment of a legal guardian to manage my personal and financial affairs due to cognitive incapacitation. The primary signature at the bottom of the petition was Garrett Whitfield. The secondary signature was Constance Whitfield. Accompanying the report was a signed statement from a corrupt private physician who had never sat in a room with me for a single second. They weren't just trying to bully me into selling the cabin. They were preparing to legally erase me. They were going to use Ohio's involuntary commitment laws to lock me inside a psychiatric facility, declare me mentally incompetent, and have Garrett appointed as my legal guardian so he could sign the quitclaim deed over to his mother's development company himself. I sat at my desk in the dark, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my face, the chest tightening so hard I could barely breathe. The clock on my laptop read 11:45 p.m. in exactly 3 days. On my 30th birthday, a specific legal timeline was set to mature, a timeline my grandfather had put in place 6 years ago before he ever left the cabin. I knew about it because of a small business card tucked deep inside my grandparents' hall closet, hidden behind a stack of old quilts. The card belonged to Margaret Morrison, attorney at law, marked with the words, Caldwell Family Irrevocable Trust. I pulled my phone out, my fingers slick with cold sweat. I dialed the personal cell number handwritten on the back of the card. It was midnight. The line rang twice before a steady, sharp, professional voice answered. "This is Margaret Morrison." "Margaret," I whispered, my voice cracking down the center as I looked toward the bedroom door, listening for Garrett's footsteps in the hallway. "My name is Sarah Caldwell. I am Harold Caldwell's granddaughter. They are trying to commit me. They are trying to take the cabin." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustle of papers, the click of a pen, and then the coldest, most reassuring sentence I had ever heard in my life. "I've been waiting for your call for 6 years, Sarah," Margaret Morrison said flatly. "Your grandfather told me they would move when the calendar hit your 30th birthday. Listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything. Do not drink anything Garrett makes for you tonight. I am pulling the trust architecture out of escrow right now." Margaret Morrison's voice down the phone line didn't just feel like a legal lifeline. It felt like a fortress. "They think they are playing a short game, Sarah," she told me, her tone clipping each word with Arctic authority. "But your grandparents spent 6 years building a legal vault that handles exactly this brand of family parasite. Tomorrow morning at 8, I am filing a public asterisk lis pendens against the Cedar Lake property." The moment that notice hits the county recorder's system, the title freezes completely. No one can sell, transfer, or attach a lien to that land until I personally pull the motion. If Garrett or his mother try to file a forged quitclaim or an affidavit of heirship, the system will instantly reject it on chain of title grounds. "What about the psychological evaluation, Margaret?" I whispered. My phone pressed so hard against my ear the plastic casing creaked. "They have a signed report. They're planning to put me on a 72-hour psychiatric hold." "A petition for involuntary commitment requires a formal court hearing and an independent evaluation by a state-appointed psychologist," Margaret stated cleanly. "A corrupt private physician's note won't get them past a probate judge who actually reads the statutes. But you cannot give them an excuse. If they try to provoke an emotional outburst from you, you give them absolute compliance and complete silence. Let them think their trap is working. Let them walk right into the boardroom on your 30th birthday thinking they've won. I will be standing right behind them with the original trust documents." I hung up the phone at 12 a.m. and slipped it under my mattress. The house was dead quiet, the kind of silence that has an edge to it, where every creak of the floorboards sounds like a warning. I lay flat on my back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, counting the seconds between the dripping of the bathroom faucet. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I didn't close my eyes for a single second that night. At 6:30 in the morning, Garrett walked into our bedroom. He was already fully dressed in his charcoal designer suit, his silk tie knotted perfectly, smelling faintly of cedar soap and expensive cologne. He sat on the edge of the bed, his face carrying that practiced, agonizing look of deep parental concern that he had been perfecting for weeks. He reached out to stroke my hair, his fingers cool against my forehead. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, his voice smooth and dripping with performative sympathy. "You were tossing and turning all night. You were muttering about your grandfather's fence rails again in your sleep. Honey, I'm really getting scared. The sleep deprivation is clearly making your cognitive delusions worse. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away from his touch. I looked directly into his dark eyes, keeping my jaw completely slack, my expression entirely empty. I feel a bit tired, Garrett, I said, keeping my volume low and flat, mimicking the tone of someone losing their grip. Maybe you're right. Maybe I just need some rest. A tiny flash of pure satisfaction flickered behind Garrett's eyes, a micro-adjustment of his features that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He pats my shoulder gently, standing up and smoothing his jacket. That's my girl. My mother is coming over around noon to help me organize some of your medical files. We just want what's best for you, Sarah. Responsible families sacrifice for each other when things get difficult. I know, I said cleanly. At exactly 12:15 p.m., the front doorbell rang. Constance didn't wait for Garrett to answer. She badged into our house like she already owned the mortgage, her cream silk trench coat rustling as she walked straight into the kitchen where I was standing, washing a single ceramic mug. Behind her came Garrett and a tall, silver-haired man in a tailored three-piece suit carrying an expensive leather briefcase. I recognized him instantly from local business journals. Victor Harrington, the lead commercial litigation attorney for Whitfield Development. Constance set her designer bag on the kitchen island and folded her hands, her pearl earrings catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Sarah, sweetheart," she said, her voice dropping into that dangerous, practiced register she used for charity board meetings. "This is Mr. Harrington. He's here to assist us with the family property transition. Given your current emotional volatility and memory lapses, Garrett has made the difficult decision to take over the management of your grandparents' estate. We have the voluntary legal guardianship forms right here. You just need to sign, and then we can get you the professional medical help you desperately need." Victor Harrington stepped forward, opening his briefcase with two sharp, metallic clicks, sliding a thick manila folder across the counter toward me. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, his voice flat and corporate, "your husband has documented several instances of severe cognitive impairment over the last 2 months. If you sign these voluntary papers, we can avoid a public probate court hearing for involuntary commitment. It's cleaner this way. Your husband will handle the Cedar Lake title transfer to Whitfield Development, and you can focus entirely on your psychiatric recovery." I looked at the documents. My name was printed on the second line, Sarah Caldwell Whitfield, Ward. Beside it was a line for my signature, flagged with a little bright yellow sticky tab that read "Sign here." I didn't pick up the pen. I looked directly at Garrett, who was leaning against the kitchen doorframe, his hands deep in his pockets, completely refusing to meet my gaze. "Garrett," I said, keeping my voice entirely steady, clinical, and calm. "You told me you wanted to call your dad Dad. You told me my parents were good people. Did you know your mother called my father a mechanic like it was a disease?" Garrett's jaw tightened visibly. He straightened up, his face flushing a dark, angry red. "Sarah, what are you even talking about? Your father has been dead for years. You're having another active hallucination. Mr. Harrington, look at her. She's completely disconnected from reality right now." Constance stepped closer, her face hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. Her lavender hand cream was overwhelming in the small kitchen. "Enough of this childish spectacle, Sarah. Your grandfather's cabin is a piece of dirt. Whitfield Development has already signed a purchase agreement with our primary lakefront investors for $450,000. We have a closing window of 30 days. If we miss that deadline because of your emotional delusions, our firm faces a $45,000 penalty for breach of contract, plus massive legal damages. You are going to sign these papers today, or the sheriff's deputies will be at this door with a 72-hour psychiatric warrant before nightfall." I set the ceramic mug down cleanly in the sink. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at the three of them, my husband, my mother-in-law, and their high-priced attorney, and I felt a cold, crystalline wave of absolute certainty settle into my bones. "I am not signing these papers," I said, my voice carrying an unexpected weight that made Victor Harrington pause mid-note. "And if you want to file for an involuntary hold, you can explain your financial timelines to the state probate judge tomorrow morning, because tomorrow is my 30th birthday, and the script is about to change." Constance wheeled around to face her son, her fingers gripping her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. "Garrett, handle your wife. Now." Garrett stepped toward me, his hands reaching out, his voice dropping into that smooth, terrifyingly reasonable tone he used to close real estate deals. "Baby, come on. Don't ruin this family. If you loved me, you wouldn't make this so hard. Just sign the documents and let's get through tonight." "No," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. The kitchen faucet dripped once, the metallic sound echoing against the quartz countertops. Garrett looked at his mother, a quick, sharp exchange of features that communicated everything. They had reached the end of their patience. They weren't going to wait for my birthday. 3 hours later, at 3:30 p.m., I was sitting on the living room sofa when the front door opened without a knock. Garrett walked in, flanked by 2 private medical transport officers in dark blue uniforms carrying a restraint chair. Behind them stood Constance, a look of cold, triumphant resolution stamped across her frosted features. "I tried to do this the gentle way, Sarah," Garrett said, his voice completely hollow as he handed a piece of paper to the lead transport officer. "But your behavioral health has deteriorated to an unsafe level. This is an emergency psychiatric hold authorization. You're coming with us to Mercer Crest Medical Center." I didn't fight them. I didn't struggle as the officers took my arms and led me out the front door toward the unmarked white transport van parked in the driveway. I looked back through the rear window as the van pulled out of the neighborhood. Garrett and Constance were standing on the front lawn, the manila folder clutched firmly in Constance's hand, both of them watching the vehicle disappear with matching, confident smiles. They thought the game was over. They thought they had legally erased the only obstacle standing between their firm and a $500,000 lakefront development plot. They had no idea that they had just triggered the exact legal architecture my grandfather had put in place 6 years ago before he ever left Cedar Lake. By 6:00 p.m., I was locked inside a private room in the psychiatric observation wing of Mercer Crest Medical Center. The room was sterile, white, smelling heavily of floor wax, iodine, and generic industrial disinfectant. The heavy door was locked from the outside, the window reinforced with safety glass that distorted the gray evening sky. A nurse came in at 7:30 p.m. to check my vitals, her strawberry hand sanitizer doing nothing to mask the clinical chill of the environment. I asked to make my legal phone call. The nurse looked at my chart, shook her head with a look of false, practiced sympathy, and said, "Your healthcare proxy, Mrs. Harlow, has restricted all communication for your own optimal recovery, sweetheart. No outside calls are permitted during the evaluation period." They had completely blocked the exits. I was completely isolated, locked inside a medical capsule, with no voice, no phone, and no family left to look for me. But at 11:47 p.m., the door to my room unlocked softly. The night shift nurse who walked in was a woman in her late 50s named Donna Kowalski. She had silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical clip, a stethoscope slung around her neck, and a small, leather-bound notebook tucked into the pocket of her scrubs. She didn't move with the rushed, indifferent energy of the daytime staff. She moved slowly, methodically, with the unhurried steadiness of someone who had spent 23 years watching human structures fall apart and put themselves back together in the dark. She checked my IV drip, adjusted the monitor readouts, and then came to stand at the foot of my bed, clicking her pen open against her notebook. She didn't look at me like I was a chart or a diagnosis. She looked at me like a person. "All right, Sarah," Donna whispered, her voice low and remarkably warm in the sterile room. "Your mother-in-law and husband have been out at the nurse's station for 3 hours with a manila folder, pushing the residency doctors to sign the long-term cognitive incapacitation papers before morning. They're claiming you have severe delusions about a property trust." She paused, her sharp eyes scanning my face. "But I've been reading your neurological readouts for the last 2 hours, sweetheart. Your brain activity is perfectly stable. Your heart rate only spikes when your husband walks into the corridor. I've seen a lot of greedy families try to use this wing as a corporate eraser. Squeeze my index finger if you can understand exactly what I am saying to you right now." She placed her warm, dry index finger into my left palm under the heavy thermal blanket. I gathered every single ounce of neural focus left in my body, my fingers curling tightly around her knuckle, delivering one distinct, powerful, voluntary squeeze. Donna didn't flinch. She didn't call for the resident doctor. She simply allowed a slow, fierce smile to spread across her weathered face, her pen instantly scratching a time-stamped entry into her private leather notebook. "I thought so," Donna whispered, leaning closer, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint tea. "Your grandfather Harold was an electrician out at Cedar Lake, wasn't he? He fixed the wiring in my sister's lakeside cottage 10 years ago. He wouldn't even take a tip. He said standard structures deserve standard honesty." She slipped the notebook back into her scrub pocket and squeezed my hand back tightly. "Your husband thinks you're going to sleep through the midnight deadline, Sarah. He told the admissions desk you don't turn 30 until next month, but I pulled your authenticated driver's license records from intake. In exactly 12 minutes, the clock hits midnight. It's your 30th birthday, and your husband's development contract is about to turn into a felony." The mechanical clock on the wall of the psychiatric wing clicked forward to 12:00 a.m. June 14th. My 30th birthday had officially arrived, and with it, the quiet detonation of the Caldwell family irrevocable trust. Under the clinical fluorescent hum of the hospital room, Donna stood completely still by the door, her leather-bound notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. "The trust distributed its assets to your personal bank account at midnight, Sarah," she whispered, her eyes locked on the small glass window of my door. "Margaret Morrison just confirmed the digital execution. The Cedar Lake cabin, the cash portfolio, the investments, they are legally, permanently yours. Your husband has absolutely nothing left to sign." I forced myself up, my muscles screaming from the chemical sedation they had pumped into my IV line hours before. The room felt heavy, the white walls closing in, but my mind was entirely clear, stripped of the fog they had tried to wrap me in. "Get the line out, Donna," I said, my voice coming out as a raspy, sandpaper growl. "I am walking out of this facility on my own 2 feet." Donna didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her warm, experienced hands quickly and expertly unpinning the IV needle from my right arm, applying a clean piece of medical tape to the puncture point. "Detective Morrison from the county sheriff's office is already down in the main lobby, Sarah. Margaret called him 45 minutes ago with the forensic report on the forged healthcare directive. Your stepmother and husband are currently sitting in Dr. Callahan's private administrative office, entirely unaware that the architecture they built has completely collapsed." I pulled on the dry, simple clothes Donna had brought me from the staff locker room, a pair of dark jeans and a gray fleece pullover that felt heavy and grounding against my skin. I tucked Grandpa Harold's blue plaid handkerchief deep into my jacket pocket. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door of room 412, the hallway of the psychiatric observation wing was empty, bathed in that dim, underwater blue light that hospitals get at 2 in the morning. Our footsteps made no sound on the polished linoleum as we walked toward the executive boardroom at the end of the corridor. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass partition of the conference room, I could see them. Garrett was sitting at the massive oval table of polished walnut, his charcoal designer suit jacket unbuttoned, his silk tie loosened just a fraction, looking completely at ease. Constance sat beside him, her fingers casually tracing the edge of the thick manila folder, her pearl earrings catching the prismoidal light from the central light fixture. Across from them sat Dr. Callahan, the chief medical evaluator, studying a stack of medical records with a deep, troubled frown line between his brows. Their high-priced litigation attorney, Victor Harrington, stood near the window, his Mont Blanc briefcase resting open on a chair, completely confident that this was just another standard corporate erasure. I pushed the double doors open. The sharp, heavy click of the lock falling back echoed through the silent boardroom. Garrett's head snapped up first. The color instantly drained from his face, his features locking into an expression of sheer, unadulterated disbelief as he saw me standing there, my spine completely straight, my eyes boring directly into his. "Sarah," he stammered, his voice cracking down the center as he stood up, his hand reflexively reaching for his loosened tie. "What are you doing out of your room? Dr. Callahan, she's actively wandering." The cognitive delusions are worse than we thought. "Sit down, Garrett," I said cleanly. My volume was low, conversational, but it carried an ice-cold finality that stopped him mid-breath. Constance rose slowly, her silk trench coat rustling against the leather chair, her face hardening into a mottled purple mask of pure rage. "How dare you break into a restricted medical conference, Sarah? You are a sick, unstable girl who needs to be legally contained for her own safety. Detective, remove her from this room immediately." She was looking past me, toward the doorway where Detective Morrison had just appeared, flanked by 2 uniformed county sheriff's deputies. Morrison didn't look at Constance. He walked straight to the center of the walnut table, pulled a thick leather folder from under his arm, and laid it down cleanly over Constance's manila documents. "Mrs. Constance Whitfield and Mr. Garrett Whitfield," Detective Morrison said, his voice carrying the flat, methodical weight of a man reading a weather forecast. "I am executing a felony warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit grand larceny, identity theft, and first-degree forgery." Victor Harrington stepped forward, his polished corporate confidence fracturing around the edges as he held up his hands. "Detective, there is a misunderstanding here. My clients possess a valid, notarized healthcare power of attorney that authorizes total guardianship over Mrs. Whitfield's medical and financial affairs due to cognitive incapacitation. The healthcare directive you filed at intake this morning is a digital forgery, Mr. Harrington," Detective Morrison stated flatly. He reached into his folder, sliding 2 high-resolution magnification sheets across the table toward the attorney. "Our forensic document analyst verified the signature on page 4 of your petition at 11 o'clock tonight. The signature is a scanned, high-opacity copy of Sarah Caldwell's signature taken from an old 2022 medical record, digitally superimposed onto a fraudulent authorization clause. The ink density is perfectly uniform, a mechanical reproduction that doesn't match a pen-on-paper stroke. Your clients forged a medical authorization to strip a legal adult of her civil liberties to close a commercial real estate deal." Garrett collapsed back into his leather chair, his jaw working silently, his eyes staring at the forensic sheets like they were a live grenade. The charming acquisitions manager who had spent 2 years telling me I was invisible had completely run out of rooms to hide in. "This doesn't prove anything," Constance hissed, her voice rising into a sharp, desperate shriek that made Dr. Callahan flinch back from the table. "The Cedar Lake cabin is family property. We signed a legitimate purchase agreement with Ridgeline Development. We have investors who expect a clean title by the end of the month. Sarah is an emotional child who is ruining this family's financial survival out of pure sibling jealousy. The Cedar Lake cabin hasn't been in your grandparents' personal names for 6 years, Constance," I said, stepping up to the edge of the table, my hands resting flat against the polished wood. I looked directly into her cold slits of eyes. "My grandfather, Harold Caldwell, established an irrevocable family trust in 2020. The title to that land was recorded under the trust at the county recorder's office long before you ever started measuring it in dollar signs. The trust documentation explicitly states that if any third party attempts to attach a lien, a quitclaim, or a fraudulent affidavit to the property, the title freezes automatically under a pre-filed lease pendens asterisk notice. Margaret Morrison filed that notice at 8 o'clock yesterday morning. Your contract with Ridgeline Development isn't just dead. It's a breach of contract that carries a $45,000 personal penalty that your firm will be paying out of pocket tomorrow." Victor Harrington looked down at his legal pad, his pen completely motionless. He closed his briefcase with 2 soft, definitive clicks, stepped back from the Whitfields, and looked at Detective Morrison with a face the color of old concrete. "I am withdrawing as counsel for Whitfield Development effective immediately, Detective. My firm was completely unaware of the document alterations." "You said this was simple, Mom," Garrett whispered, his voice stripped raw, his perfect hair falling over his forehead as he stared at the handcuffs the uniformed deputy had just placed on the table before him. "You said she would just sleep through the birthday deadline. You said nobody checks the chain of title on old lake lots." "Shut up, Garrett," Constance growled, but the performative steel in her voice had completely evaporated. She stood there under the harsh boardroom lights, her frosted hair disheveled, her cream silk coat looking wrinkled and cheap, finally looking every bit her actual age. The elite country club matriarch, who had spent 30 years looking down at people who drove pickup trucks, was being led out of Mercycrest Medical Center in steel restraints, her heels clicking a frantic, ruined rhythm on the linoleum until the sound completely died down the hallway. Dr. Callahan removed his reading glasses, rubbing his eyes with a deep, heavy sigh of exhaustion. "Mrs. Whitfield, pardon me, Ms. Caldwell, I owe you a profound professional apology. The hospital administration will be conducting an immediate internal review of our intake validation protocols. Your chart has been cleared, and your discharge is recorded as completely voluntary." "Thank you, doctor," I said quietly. I turned back to Donna, who was standing by the glass partition, her private notebook tucked safely into her scrub pocket. She caught my eye and gave a small, proud nod, the same nod my grandfather used to give me when a cedar rail sat perfectly level on the south boundary line. "You take care of that cabin, Sarah Bear," she whispered, using the name only Harold Caldwell had ever known. "I will," I said. "It took care of me first." 6 months later, the consequences fell like a row of concrete dominoes, and each one made a definitive, satisfying sound. Constance and Garrett Whitfield went to trial in early spring. The county district attorney's office refused to offer a plea deal, citing the severity of the civil rights violations and the documented financial fraud against the Caldwell estate. Constance was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree forgery and conspiracy to commit grand larceny, receiving a sentence of 4 to 6 years at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Garrett accepted a plea of criminal accessory and identity theft, receiving 3 years of probation, a $50,000 fine, and the permanent suspension of his commercial real estate license. Without Garrett's acquisitions or Constance's social connections, Whitfield Development collapsed under the weight of its own debts within 90 days. The 5-bedroom estate on 2 acres was liquidated by the bank at a massive loss to cover the breach of contract penalties owed to Ridgeline Development and their primary Columbus investors. The family name that used to open every door at the country club was completely erased from the local boards, replaced by a public court record that anyone could pull for a $2 fee. I didn't celebrate their ruin. I didn't post about it on social media, and I never returned a single one of the frantic, tear-streaked emails Garrett sent from his attorney's office begging for a second chance to rebuild our marriage like a family. Some structures are too rotted to repair. You don't patch a foundation that was poured with pure deception. You demolish it and let the ground clear. It is early June now, 2026. The morning sun is coming through the white pines at Cedar Lake at a low, brilliant angle that turns the heavy walnut kitchen table completely gold. The front porch still sags a little on the left side, and the screen door still creaks on its hinges whenever the breeze off the water picks up, but the south fence line is perfectly level, the cedar rails solid and clean against the dirt. I am sitting in the woven vinyl chair that used to belong to my grandmother Vivian, a hot cup of black coffee between my hands, watching a blue heron stand perfectly motionless in the shallows near the old wooden dock. The air smells of wood smoke, old books, and that sweet, sharp pine resin that I finally know the exact name for. It smells like home. My design business has been relocated permanently to the cabin's spare bedroom. I have 3 new regional clients, an automated invoicing system that runs through Margaret Morrison's corporate office, and a bank account that belongs purely and completely to me. I don't check my phone for missed calls from a Ridgemont area code anymore. I don't wait for people to change their minds about my worth. If you are watching this right now, and you find yourself locked inside a room where people are trying to tell you who you are, where your family is treating your quietness as weakness, or calculating your value in dollar signs next to a service entrance, I need you to hear me very clearly. Stop waiting for them to see you. See yourself first. Build a legal, mental, and emotional architecture that you control completely. Decide who gets a key, how wide the front door opens, and exactly who is allowed to walk through the frame. That isn't revenge, that is timing. I sip my coffee as the heron lifts its heavy wings, clearing the dark water of the lake and flying straight into the clear blue sky. My name is Sarah Caldwell. I am 30 years old today, and I am finally, securely, standing on my own solid ground.